We're here with Bill Macaitis, who is currently at Slack, one of the fastest growing companies, period, right now. Previously at Zendesk, previously at Salesforce, took Zendesk, helped take Zendesk public. So we're going to learn a lot from him. When you joined Slack, it was around a $1.1 billion valuation.
Yep.
Now it's 2.8?
Yes. 2.8
How much credit can you take?
None. It's all the customers. It's all. Do we have any Slack customers here? Raise your hand.
Oh my gosh, everyone almost.
Thank you, all of you.
Okay, this side of the room needs a little work. But my question really is, how do you know when you're on a rocket ship like that, and you're head of marketing, head of growing it, how do you know how much is what you did versus just organic growth?
So I think any good marketer is going to be thinking about attribution and how you track that growth and what's encompassed from within it. So we use a couple different things. We have the easiest, most low-tech solution out there, which is the infamous sign-up survey. So anyone that comes in and joins Slack, we offer them, I think, $50 or $100 in free credit and just say, hey, do you want to take the survey? And there we list all the different forms of how they might have heard about us. We actually do a decent amount of advertising now. So we'll be like, hey, was it word of mouth? Did you hear us in the press, a piece of content, a podcast, an ad in print? And so that's one way that we'll do it. We also do some broader kind of aided and unaided recall studies that we do across the US to understand like how many people actually know about Slack. And again, where they heard about us. We'll use kind of like online attribution. We use Convertro, which is a great tool for multi-channel attribution, which helps us understand of the different sources.
So what's your conclusion after, from that broad swath of?
When I'm in San Francisco, everybody seems to know about Slack. When I go outside of it, the number of hands tremendously goes down, which is like all of us, right? I don't know, like who's doing startups or in the Bay Area, All right, a couple, like that's generally what happens. Like here, everyone knows kind of all the things that are going on, but the further you go out, so you have to be careful about that, right? And you can't just go in with an assumption. I remember the first unaided recall study we did. It was, I think we studied like 22 to 55 college educated, kind of like potential early adopters, and really like 1.2% of people had even heard of Slack. And so that's, again, you just kind of have to understand like what the opportunity presents itself. And that's partly why I was excited to join Slack, was that to get the word out, to help really show the world like what's possible when you're using it.
So we had your CEO, Stuart, on Bloomberg Television yesterday.
Yeah,
he said you guys are growing 15% a month. Congratulations about that. But he also said that he doesn't really think that Slack really needs a sales force. You guys want to focus on advertising. You want to focus on some of the more organic earned media. Tell us a little bit about that strategy, how you plan to grow. I know you have ads in movie theaters now.
Yeah, so I think a lot of companies will end up happening, word of mouth is hopefully always going to be one of your strongest sources of growth. And for Slack, that was one of the things that helped propel it to be the fastest growing business application ever. But beyond that, like a lot of times when you're marketing, you think about, well, how can you add fuel to the fire? And what are the different tactics you can build beyond that? And so we really tried to put together a more methodical plan to think about everything from PR to advertising to content marketing to referrals to conversion rate marketing, optimization, all that different chain there to think about how we can help accelerate that. And when we started thinking about sales too, we do have a sales team, we have an accounts team. But it's a little bit different. They're there to really help people through the buying process. They stay with you through the life cycle of the accounts. I'm a big believer in maintaining that core word of mouth growth. And what that means is you have to have people have good experiences with your brand. And it's really interesting. Like my role, I have the CMO title, but I actually manage the sales, the marketing, and our support teams. And those customer-facing teams are often like the very first interaction with your brand. And for anyone that's bought enterprise software, it kind of sucks. I don't know, like you see an ad, right?
Hey, some of these guys sell enterprise software. So.
We're all guilty of it, right? We've all done this. Like you click on an ad, you're sent to the landing page. It's prison landing page. You can't get out of it. You just want to see the demo. You have to fill out like 19 fields, your cell phone number. You're going to get called immediately before you're ready. And some of that's just been incentivized by like the metrics we use and an obsession with like pipeline and leads. And so I think like when we thought about accounts or sales, like we really wanted to try to do it a different different way. And we wanted to make sure that people had a great experience. And so we'll still metric those teams, but we metric them based on Net Promoter Score. We metric them based on CSAT. We run surveys after someone has bought from us and said, hey, how was your experience with that salesperson?
And some of those insights go back into the product.
Yeah, exactly. And it's this great virtuous loop, right? One of our biggest teams at Slack is our support team. It actually dwarfs sales.
How
it's
many
about
people?
4-to-1 ratio. It's maybe about 80 people in support right now, and there's
How many
maybe
people
about 20 in
total
accounts.
work for Slack?
We're about 250, 225, somewhere in
You're
there.
tiny.
I forgot our last. I'll frame of
How
reference.
many users do you have now?
I 1.25 million daily active users.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's and we've been around about 18 months, or at least since from Slack formed. It was a pivot from a gaming company, which is its own crazy story. But ultimately, I think we'd always want to think about, marketing is there to help add fuel to the fire. I mean, you have to have product market fit, but once it's there, you can add fuel to the fire. You can think about all these different forms of channels, but I don't think you can ever take your eye off that word of mouth, and that's got to be a commitment to being very customer-centric and focused, and making sure that you understand where people are having good experiences with your brand, what are those experiences with sales, with marketing, with support, and ultimately the brand is just simply the sum of every single experience you've had with your customer.
So
with
when
your
you
company.
to go from a little more than 1 million to 10 million to 100 million, how does your plan change?
Yeah, so I think we're in kind of a unique situation. A lot of B2B enterprise products will be sold into one specific function, so like the finance team or the marketing team, or they're very targeted at one individual segment, so either just the enterprise or just the SMB. Slack's been kind of unique in that it addresses a core pain point of really all business sizes and all functional teams. We look at the incoming data of people signing up for Slack, and we see that like they're part of finance teams and marketing teams and sales teams and support teams and dev teams, and they're big companies, they're small companies, they're medium-sized, they're in government, they're all these different ranges here. So I think what that means is when we're thinking about scaling out, we can actually take a lot of consumer-based marketing growth tactics. And so we actually do a lot of advertising, and you've started to see it. We're in national theaters right now, and we're really starting to push that out with some additional different campaigns. We're in a lot of print right now, but mostly because that national advertising allows us to kind of lower our CPMs because we have a very broad base of early adopters that we can go after. So I think that's going to be a big part for helping accelerate the growth. I think, again, a commitment to making sure that people have great experiences and they want to continue to recommend your brand is going to be big. We're doing a lot of content marketing too. So we have a Slack Variety Pack podcast, which was kind of different. Like most companies don't have their own podcast, or if they do, it's just talking about their products the entire time. And this was something where we wanted to have just someone have a good experience and touch point with our brand. And so the podcast is all around life and work and the experience.
People actually listen to that?
We've had 1.3 million listens so far.
Wow, so like as many as you have users.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy like how quickly it's taken off.
So, but what are what obstacles do you see? I know it might even be difficult. Maybe the obstacles that it's hard to see the obstacles when you're growing this fast. Like, how do you know what you're doing wrong?
I think I've been fortunate to be a part of a couple of very fast-growing companies, so I see a lot of the challenges that normally present itself. I think the one that we worry about the most is just maintaining our culture. Slack's really different. It's one of the reasons that I was excited to join it was you don't often see a company that has like core values of empathy and courtesy and craftsmanship. I'm used to coming from very like war-based values, like dominate, destroy, crush competitors. And here it is like these nice people, right? And they really care about making an awesome product and an awesome experience. So I think when I joined, we were about 50 people. Like I said, we're about 250 now. And so, it's 5 times the amount of people. And I think we've all worked with jerks and assholes, sorry. But you really worry about that. You bring that in, or you bring someone that's just a shark, and it can really destroy the culture. So we spend a lot of our time there.
You mentioned crushing the competition, and I think your area is interesting because I think this was even more buzzy like 3 or so years ago with Jive and Chatter and Yammer acquisition. And why is this time different? I mean, have those things fizzled in your mind? Do you think that you still consider them competitors?
Yeah, I think, if we look 10 years from now, I think the answers will become kind of obvious. But for now, I mean, I have my theories on it. I worked at Salesforce, and I was there when Chatter launched, and we still used email. And I was, when I was at Zendesk and helped them go public, we used Yammer, and I still used email. And I think for a lot of people—
Everyone still uses email, right?
Well, we asked them, we asked people like when they come to Slack, and we're like, well, what did you use before Slack? And they're like, nothing. And we're like, well, really, like, if you probe them, like, yeah, if you had to like talk with your teammates, what are you using? And they're like, well, the problem is it's never one tool. They're using Gmail and Outlook and Skype and Hangouts and text messages and AIM and private Facebook groups. And the problem is like their communications are just so scattered across. And I think Slack's been one of the few tools that really replaces the need for those 7 or 8 different ones. It brings everything together. I think that's incredibly powerful. I think that the proliferation of B2B apps has almost helped increase the value proposition of Slack. Because that's one of the really powerful things for those who use Slack is you can pretty much port in any business application, the messaging or the content into Slack. And that makes those tools work better. You can post rich links that will automatically unfurl. You can see file details. It makes your life a lot simpler, and ultimately, I think it's just part of the growth has been its real results. Like we asked 1,600 customers, like, are you actually seeing decreases in email? Are you seeing increases in productivity? Are you seeing decreases in meetings? And across the board, we saw massive declines in email, declines in meetings, which I hate. I feel like I've spent 2 years of my life in wasteless status update meetings, and improvements in productivity, right? So I think it's just the real value is actually causing this to get traction.
Well, let me ask what software you use to help with your growth.
So I'll give a plug for Delighted. I'm a big NPS geek. My team got me an NPS birthday cake. So random. But I love Net Promoter Survey. So I love asking our customers, like how likely do they recommend Slack, scale of 1 to 10. But it's really that open-ended feedback. And so that's a really cool example of a tool where they'll be able to run those surveys, but then they post them automatically within Slack. So I've got like my NPS responses channel. We've got like most of the companies in there, and everyone reads the real-time responses as they come in, because that's good. You want to find out, like, I'm always constantly amazed when I talk with different CEOs that just don't know what are the top 3 reasons they're getting recommended, or what are the top 3 reasons they're not getting recommended, right? And that's like scary. Like everyone should know that, and that's like really easy data that you can get by running these surveys. So we'll do that. We use Zendesk. That was actually chosen before I got there, but for customer support, and again, we'll have every single customer support ticket will come into Slack, which is great because we do a thing called like everyone does support at Slack. And we'll have new people that just join that are doing support, but they can quickly just go into that channel. They can search for problems and see all the answers. It's a great example of kind of transparency and having all that institutional knowledge. And really across the board, we're just trying to build that marketing tech stack. I talked about Convertro, which is multi-channel attribution. I think that's really important, especially in B2B, because it's never just 1 or 2 interactions that cause them to come and buy from you. It's usually 10 to 20, and you have to figure out how do you divvy up that credit across. Yeah, so we're really just starting to build up that marketing tech stack across the advertising servers that we use, the optimization, the testing platform, the nurturing, just really building up those best-in-class tools. But really, the cool thing is just getting them to integrate into Slack.
How big do you get before you have to start using some more traditional sales software?
Right now, actually, we do use Salesforce. So again, from a previous life, I think I see the trend shifting is I hope that a lot more organizations are starting to become more customer-centric. And again, with a couple of things we did differently on our sales team, which didn't necessarily match the software we're using, was our sales or accounts people stay with you the entire life cycle of the account. Because we wanted you to be successful. Like I always hated when I was sold to, and I got the steak dinners and 5 people in the room and all the VPs, and then like I signed the deal and like everyone ran. Like rats and the lights were on or something. I was like, where is my support? And they're like, no, actually you have to spend $1 million to get additional ongoing support.
Yeah.
And it just didn't seem right. Like why wouldn't you want these people to be successful? So they would go out and recommend you. And so we do use Salesforce, and I think it's great and it's optimized a little bit more for the top portion of that funnel, like the pre-sales part. And I think that's a market opportunity to think about, like, a CRM that's going to be able to track and follow people through that entire life cycle. So some of that stuff we do internally. We'll build some of our own internal tools, but in general, we use a different broad array of technology for our tech stack.
Well, eventually you get big enough that you are going to have to do that wining and dining, right?
Yeah.
Like, who are the big names that you have currently?
Yeah, sure. So we'll work with, work with some very large organizations, whether that's an Adobe, a Comcast, an Airbnb, a Disney. These are big multinational companies. In the government space, we'll work with the Department of State, the General Services Administration, really across the board. We have like mineral solvent companies that work with us. The one thing we have found that works really well is Slack has a freemium model, so it's a little bit different. It's not time-bound or user-bound. So anyone can come in and start using it. And a lot of times that's what we see, the use case. When we started off with Adobe, it was one team, and then it grew to 10 and 20 and 40 and 50, and kind of that organic adoption of the product. And then it hits a point where the organization is thinking about a mass level deployment. But I think traditional sales was purely outbound and whining and dining. We more look at it as, hey, we want to help you out. You're going to have questions, yeah. And at some point, when you get into mid-market enterprise, they're going to have procurement teams, they're going to have legal teams that want to talk about the terms of service. They're going to have, the various IT. You're going to have security reviews. Like that's just part of the normal process, and we want someone that's going to help you through that. And we still want to metric them, but again, we want to metric them on if you're successful, and not just did you buy it, not just did you renew, but do you recommend? Like that's the gold standard that we shoot for.
So we have about a minute and a half for you to tell me, in 5 years, how big is Slack? How big have you gotten it? Has it IPO'd at that point? What is your vision of the future?
Yeah, I think our focus is always going to be on just making sure customers have a great experience. I will say a couple things. Like we're not planning on building out all these tools. Like a lot of times it's a misperception, like, oh, you're going to build out a CRM tool, or you're going to build out a program management tool, or you're going to build out this and this, and we really don't. We don't think that's the right approach. Mm-hmm. It's just there's already every single vertical. There's a dozen companies. There's best of breeds there. We just want to make those tools work better within Slack. That's a really important part of our focus. And I think.
But how big are you going to be? Do you have a target?
I don't know. No, we don't have a target really. I will say this though. I do think the shift to messaging is inevitable, and I think that every company out there will shift, especially businesses, will shift to having messaging as the core platform for their team communications. I think that shift has already happened in the consumer landscape. Between Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp and Snapchat, like you won't find a millennial or younger that is really using email much anymore. And I think businesses are starting to see the same advantages, especially when you leverage with a tool like Slack. That's a platform where you can start to bring in all those communications in one place. It makes your life so much better. I feel like I have so much more time to actually do work. I feel like the throughput of my teams are better. The culture, the transparency of open channels, there's so many more benefits than the traditional tool of email, because email was invented 40 years ago. I mean, it boggles my mind. It was never designed for team communication. Anyone that's been on like a 40 reply all, CC all company just knows how painful it is. It's siloed, It's fractured when people leave. It's just a terrible tool for it.
It sounds like you have a lot of customers in this audience. Any of you guys who have trouble with Slack, you tell this guy.
Yes.
And thank you so much for giving us your insight.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, guys.